Hi there, welcome to IndyCar on the 9th of May. In this morning's news, I have three stories for you. The first one is actually about polls. As you know, the European elections are coming up, and of course the British pollsters are already out in force trying to guess who is going to come out on top when it comes to electing MEPs. So the latest polls published by the British press this week are showing an interesting trend. First of all, Nigel Farage's new Brexit party, which has nobody elected and absolutely zero voters as far as we know, has suddenly emerged as the frontrunner alongside the Labour Party in the current polls, on 27% apiece. So the fact that Nigel Farage is back in the limelight as the most recognisable figure in Brexit in Britain at the moment has already produced an instant result, which is suddenly his new Brexit party has basically stolen the limelight from all the rest of the parties in the UK. You know, a 27% support level of a party which has never existed before now and has only one member, maybe two if you include the previous incumbent, is quite a remarkable achievement for Farage, who is probably or has been the most vocal disruptor in British politics in the last century. So that's the first thing. The Labour Party has done surprisingly well in this poll. To be able to equal the Brexit Party first out of the traps, as it were, in the first poll is quite strange. Then we have, going down through the polls, the next would be the Tory party, who have slumped to 16%. So they've seen their share of the vote collapse completely. 16% is probably one of the lowest vote shares for the Conservative Party in any poll that I've seen for a long time. And finally, you've got the Tiggers, or whatever they're calling themselves this week, the new anti-Brexit party. But the Tiggers have really just taken the votes off the Green Party. The Green Party was always the alternative anti-Brexit party before the Tiggers ever moved into the centre ground. So the Tiggers, whatever they are calling themselves these days, are on, I'm just trying to remember, I think it's about 7%, I might be wrong, I'll go back and check that. So they've taken a reasonable share of the vote, but not even close to half of what the Tories have got, and certainly nowhere near 27%. So it looks like, on the face of it, the Brexit party is going to get quite a lot of seats in this Euro election, which is the most ironic thing I can think of, in terms of what's happening at the moment. Britain's trying to pull itself out of the European Union. At the same time, electing MEPs who don't actually want to be in the European Union, going over there and taking a salary from the European Union. And as Jean-Claude Juncker once said, the biggest waste of resources in the European Union was always Nigel Farage's salary. Now they might have to pay several people's salaries who don't want to be in the EU. The Labour Party's position on Brexit is still completely baffling to most of us. On the one hand, Jeremy Corbyn is in favour of Brexit, but on the other hand, the rest of the Labour Party seems to be completely confused about whether it's for it or against it. The general consensus is they want some kind of customs union, and at the moment they're in discussions with the Tory party over this so-called customs union, customs arrangement, the Tories offering a temporary customs arrangement rather than a permanent customs union. Eventually the two parties will probably come to some kind of fudge which nobody will like, and the whole of Mrs May's deal will be put back to a meaningful vote in Parliament again. But anyway, in the meantime, you'll notice that the SNP in Scotland is not mentioned in any of these polls, probably because the pollsters realise that Scotland, generally speaking, is mostly in favour of the SNP and mostly in favour of staying inside the European Union. So they're not really looking at Scotland, and there aren't that many seats to be fought over for Scotland. If I remember correctly, there are only 6 MEP seats available for Scots to vote on. But I think it's important that when we do vote, that we vote with our usual intentions of independence, because anything else at the moment would be sending the wrong message to Europe. We need to send a strong message to Europe that we are pro-European, that we want to remain part of the European scene. Whether we're full members or not is not the issue here, but if for the time being we send a message to them saying that we want to stay in the EU, I think that would be a good message to send. Okay, next down, what was it I said in my blurb earlier on? We had the elections and the polls coming up. Oh yeah, pollution. All right, now pollution is on everybody's agenda these days, particularly microplastics. These are the tiny particles of plastic which find their way into the seas, into the watercourses, into the lakes, and into the animals that live in the water, and eventually into our food, because we eat the animals that have eaten these microplastics. So we end up eating our own rubbish, and so do all the other creatures in the wild. But what's happened recently is a team of scientists have combed through the riverbanks of the River Forth, and they've looked at random samples of sand dug below the surface a little bit, and we're appalled to find large quantities of not just microplastics, but little plastic pellets. These are only a couple of millimeters across. These are tiny pellets of plastic which were manufactured by Grangenouth, by the petrochemicals industry, and these are the precursors of the plastics that were then made into things. So sheet plastic would be made from these granules. Anyway, these granules have leaked into the environment and have found themselves washed up on the riverbanks in amongst the sand. There's quite a lot of it as well. And it's interesting to see that most of these granules appear to be coloured. Now, the coloured granules tell the researchers that these plastics are pretty old. And the interesting thing about these little plastic pellets is they do not degrade. Not at all. They don't break down at all. No matter how old they get, they stay the same size and they remain in the environment pretty much forever, like the grains of sand they're mixed in with. But they seem to be quite appalled at the amount of them that had accumulated in the river. And checks were also made in places like Loch Lomond and other rivers, and they discovered microplastics virtually everywhere, although the levels in Loch Lomond were very, very tiny. And the water in Loch Lomond is still safe to swim in as a result. They have tested that. But they have been finding plastic rubbish in Loch Lomond, some of which was up to a decade old. So you're talking about, crisp packets that have been lying in the mud or lying in the water for up to 10 years, are still intact, haven't broken down at all. So there is an urgent need for us to find out where all this stuff is coming from. We know that some of the litter in Loch Lomond is just coming from picnickers, and that means more attention has to be paid to making sure that people don't leave any litter. The second thing is that the INEOS plant, or INEOS company which runs Grangemouth, has taken it over, is now the responsible party when it comes to plastic pollution entering the River Forth, which of course is right next to the Grangemouth plant. And the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency is responsible for policing these levels of pollution. And the amount of plastic granules which find their way into the natural environment should be strictly controlled, and yet they're seeing very high levels, particularly around and downstream from the Grangemouth plant, which I guess you would expect, since it is the source of these microscopic pellets of plastic. So there's a problem there, a historic problem. It needs to be cleaned up. And that means INEOS need to be taken to task by SEPA, and they need to investigate where these granules have come from, how they got into the river. Remember, they're very tiny and lightweight. They could actually blow on the wind, just like a dust storm, and end up either in the river or in the sand or in the soil. And wherever they end up inside the stomachs of small animals and inside us as well, because we eat the fish and the other critters that live in the water. So there's a problem to be solved here, and it hasn't been addressed yet. Okay, finally I wanted to talk about the independence movement and its seeming disconnection between the SNP at Westminster and its aims and objectives, and the aims and objectives of the broader independence movement. I made a point yesterday of saying that if, as we hope, the independence movement has increased the number of independence voters to somewhere in the region of 2 million people, then that means, as a percentage of the population voting for independence, that the SNP members make up only about 8%. which means 92% of us are not members of the SNP. And yet, for some reason, Nicola Sturgeon didn't address the rally in Glasgow on Saturday. She didn't make any comments or make any supportive comments at all about the march through Glasgow for independence. There was nothing at all came from the SNP's public relations department. And only 2 prominent members of the SNP turned up to that march. It has angered many people, including a lot of columnists, a lot of political commentators and independent supporters alike. I've wondered why it is that people like Pete Wishart are digging themselves into the Westminster establishment and putting down roots there. Pete Wishart has announced his serious intention to run as the next, or candidate for the next Speaker of the House of Commons. Now, if you're campaigning to leave a union, do you really want to be watching your politicians who are supposed to be fighting for independence getting their feet under the table in Westminster? And this is exactly the problem that a lot of us predicted would happen. And once SNP MPs established themselves in London, that some of them, maybe not all of them, but some of them would start to enjoy it. Some of them would start to be tempted by all the freebies, you know, the extra expenses for food, for wine, you know, for breakfasts, subsidised bars, the subsidised accommodation, the expenses you can put in for all kinds of things while you're there. All of that is very tempting. But the problem that we all face in the independence movement is that the SNP appears to have disconnected itself from the people it's representing. And it has taken its eye off what the movement itself, that it had a large hand in creating, is now doing. The movement is now bigger than the SNP. It's moving faster than the MSP. It's more combative than the SNP. And it is making more headlines than the SNP about independence. So there is something wrong here. Why is the SNP not doing more? Now, we know that they have all kinds of secret plans and strategies that they have to keep, as they say, play the cards close to their chest. You know, we hear all of these aphorisms and these phrases being trotted out time and time again. We're never told what's actually happening. And so in the absence of any kind of leadership, the movement has taken it upon itself to lead itself, to self-generate its own events. And these events are growing. We're now hearing talk of the next event in Edinburgh aiming for 250,000 people on the streets of Edinburgh. And still we hear nothing from Nicola Sturgeon, from Mike Russell, or anybody else in the highest echelons of the SNP. They're so remote from us now and so concerned with what's happening in London that they're not watching what's actually going on at home. Where the support is here. It's not in London. There is no support for independence in London. There's no point in even fighting for independence in London because nobody in London wants us to be independent. I am rapidly coming to the conclusion that the SNP should have emulated what Sinn Féin has done for decades, which is it should not take up its seats in the Houses of Parliament in Westminster, but instead should stay in Scotland. And its MPs should sit maybe in a chamber in Scotland, maybe teleconferencing with London. But why? Why take up your seats in a parliament that you don't want to be in? It's a bit like Nigel Farage getting himself elected as an MEP in the European Union. He doesn't want to be there. He is basically just taking a salary and enjoying the high life on the European clock, basically. He's just charging up the expenses against the European account. Our SNP MPs in London are doing much the same thing. They're down there, they're arguing for independence, they're making a lot of noise and, you know, waving a flag for Scotland perhaps. But is it doing any good? No, it's not. It's really just wasting time. It's treading water until this referendum. Yesterday, this might have gone past a number of you, but there was an interesting thing said in Parliament yesterday in Westminster. Mundell was challenged by Tommy Shepherd about whether they would respect the claim of right, whether Mundell even actually understood what the claim of right meant, that Scotland has a right to decide on the form of government best suited to its needs at a time of its own choosing. Mundell replied that he had been very clear, he always says that, he'd been very clear there would be no referendums before 2021. Now, this date seems to have whizzed over the heads of a lot of people in the mainstream media, but why did Mundell specifically say 2021? Maybe it's because that's the date of the general election in Holyrood. Maybe that's the date at which the Tories plan to unveil some kind of master plan to put Ruth Davidson in the First Minister's seat. I don't know, but why did he say 2021? It appears that Mundell is basically giving us a clue as to what's going to happen. He knows that, or he suspects, that the SNP is going to mount an independence challenge using the general election at Holyrood as the vehicle. And therefore he's holding back the Section 30 order to prevent any vote before that. Now, if he's doing that, he has a reason for doing that. The Tories must have something in mind to counter this threat. But that, as I say, this date seems to have flown past most commentators for some reason. I commented yesterday, I thanked Mundell very much for giving us a date for the once in a generation second referendum on independence, because the SNP hasn't given us a date. But now the Scottish Secretary, Mundell, has given us a date for the next battle for independence. It's going to be after 2021, according to him. Nothing from the SNP on this date, nothing from anybody else about this date. It's all a bit fishy. But I think my point today is, on the tail end of this show, is that our friends in the SNP need to look back to their own country and look at what's going on at street level. People are self-organising, self-motivated, self-starting. Groups are popping up everywhere. People are switching from no to yes everywhere, and the SNP is absolutely out of touch with it. They're not doing or saying anything. One or two SNP members have taken it upon themselves to come to meetings, to go to rallies. People like Keith Brown, for example, James Dornan, for example, are in there swinging for the SNP. But where's the leadership? Why is it not commenting on the biggest independence event that's ever been staged in Scotland that Saturday? Nothing, not a single comment from Nicola Sturgeon about that at all. Nothing. Again, very busy making comments about Theresa May, about other international matters, but everything back at home, no connection at all. How can we, as an independence movement, hope to convince people on the doorstep that independence is a political and an economic necessity and a reality if we don't even have the support of our own politicians, because they're too far away and they're fighting Brexit? I mean, I know they don't want Brexit because it's bad for Scotland, fair enough, but where is the connection between independence and the fight for it? A party which exists with its entire reason for existence is to fight for independence. And what is it doing? It's fighting to protect England from its own stupidity by trying to counter Brexit. You might as well wade into the water and try and stop the tide. It's a King Canute effort. It's pointless. It's play acting. It's useless. It does nothing for the cause of independence whatsoever. It might look very nice and play well for the popularity of Nicola Sturgeon, but it does nothing to further the cause. And I'm beginning to see our political heavyweights being sucked into the bubble of Westminster, from the Holyrood bubble to the Westminster bubble, and everything outside of the bubble doesn't seem to exist. The rest of us, we are marching, we're singing our songs, we're having our events, we're converting people from no to yes, with absolutely no clue when there's going to be a referendum, or if there will be a referendum, or if it might be a general election that we're using to gain our independence. We're completely oblivious, treated like mushrooms, all right, kept in the dark and fed manure. It is not the way to run a movement. It's not the way to gain independence, by losing touch with the very people that you depend on to vote for you. This is a political danger of all political parties when they've been in power too long. They start, as Labour did for decades, to take the electorate for granted. And we're in danger of seeing that at the moment. Other commentators have said this recently as well. The SNP needs to wake up, needs to reconnect with its voters, and make sure to keep those voters and those supporters in the loop. Give us information. Keep us on side. Don't drift off into the London bubble and fight somebody else's battle for them. We have our own battle to fight here. Where is our leadership? Why is it not leading us? It's down there in Westminster trying to protect the United Kingdom from the stupidity of Brexit, which is pointless, because we've seen now that 27% of people want Farage's party and 27% want the Labour Party, neither of which is fundamentally anti-Brexit in any way. So you've already got something like 64% of English people are going to vote for Brexit supporting parties. So what's the point of the SNP, with its tiny amount of support in Westminster, trying to fight against that? It's useless. It's not going to serve any purpose. They would be better, I suspect, taking the Sinn Féin kind of way out of this and just taking all of our SNP MPs out of Westminster permanently. They can still keep their jobs, they can still teleoperate. I mean, we've got modern technology to do that. They don't need to be there. They don't need to sit in London and suck up expenses, which we incidentally are all paying for through our taxation, when they could do this work from home. There's nothing to stop the SNP from contributing to Westminster, because they're ignored anyway. And if you're going to be ignored, you might as well be ignored at home in comfort as have to travel all the way down to London and live out of a suitcase for a week at somebody else's expense. It's stupid, pointless, waste of money. Why not come home and support the people who really need your support, the ones who are actually voting for you, the ones who want independence, the thing that you are supposed to be finding for us, it's supposed to be getting for us, and not, incidentally, managing to get for us yet. Anyway, I'm going to stop now before I start to sound like I'm SNP bashing. I'm not. I'm in favour of the SNP. I will vote for them. But I am not happy with them at the moment for the way they are behaving with respect to these massive events that are being staged in Scotland. Incidentally, in their name, really, because this is in the name of independence, the goal that we are all working towards. And yet we don't see the leader of the Independence Party at any of these rallies, any of these massive events. Where's the leadership? It's just not there. It's like they don't care, they're not interested in it. It's somehow beneath them to turn up at a rally where there's actually real people campaigning and voting with their feet, in this case, for independence. Let's have that connection back. Let's see Nicola Sturgeon leading a march that says end London rule, not down in London taking part in London rule, because that's the way people see it. Rightly or wrongly, that's the perception at the moment of everybody that I've spoken to. We are all seeing the same thing. Our leadership is in London trying to save England from Brexit, when they should be up here trying to save Scotland from Brexit and save Scotland from being a part of it. Enough. I'm getting annoyed. But you see the picture here. It's not nice to be abandoned by your leadership when you've gone to the trouble of organising a gigantic, largest event ever staged in Scotland for independence. 150,000 people were estimated to have taken part throughout the day. That's not counting the 35,000 that were in at the end of it, who stayed on for the events and the music. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there for the moment, but it is high time the SNP reconnected with reality, and the reality is that the movement for independence has grown gigantically, and we are probably about 92% of the movement for independence is non-SNP members. And if you want to keep us on side, then turn up. I'm fond of quoting Woody Allen. The people who make history are the ones who bother to turn up. So let's see the SNP leadership bothering to turn up for these giant events. I think their popularity would be massively boosted. See you later. Bye bye.